Hi. I thought I'd send you guys all sort of a heads up where I am in terms of my book, and also a bit of a description of where the publishing industry is or isn't at this moment. But first, I just like to talk a bit about myself and why I'm really interested in writing and reading. When I was young, science fiction and fantasy was my escape. I lived in a country that had a lot of censorship, that would be Saudi Arabia, and there was about 3 hours of censored television every day, which comprised of B-grade canceled shows whose rights could be bought cheaply, and military safety and loss prevention ads. It was a fun time. There were also no real bookstores in the country. There was one shelf in a stationery store, and I remember that there was about maybe half a dozen fantasy and science fiction novels, all of which I ended up buying and reading. And there was a library, and really that library was the one thing that kept a lot of us sane when we were in that country. And that library occasionally got in a bestseller or some of the mid-list science fiction and fantasy authors of the time. And that was it. If you wanted books, you had to fly back to, in my case, Canada or the US, or Europe wasn't as, but you had to actually fly back to North America and go to a bookstore. And when we did that, when I would come back to Canada, my favorite thing in the world was to go to the bookstore in the mall. Like, we just drive up to them, I'd just be like vibrating like a German shepherd about to go play fetch, just because I know that I get through the doors, get to go to that bookstore in the mall. It was like Disneyland for me. And I would go in and I would buy as many books as my parents would let me, and leave with an armful of books, which would be basically my companions for the next, well, until we came back. And the country, like I said, it didn't have a lot of books. But it actually didn't really censor books either. So if I came back with an armful of paperback books, they would just ignore it. Like, you come back with a picture book, they'd go through everything. They would cut out anything that had any kind of nudity or any kind of men and women touching each other. So there was no objectification of women allowed. There was no intimacy between men and women allowed to be depicted. It seems really familiar somehow. And but they didn't censor the books. They never went through and looked at what we were reading, only what we were looking at in terms of TV shows and movies and photographs. But not the books. And I find that really funny, because if you think about it, an authoritarian theocracy it was less censorious than the publishing industry is now. And that's a really bad sign, I think. So anyway, the what I wanted to convey is that if anything could be considered the place I was really excited to go to, it was libraries and bookstores. And bookstores in particular, because they had new releases. And I could always go to a bookstore when I could get to them and find something worth reading. So like I said, I'm so excited because I knew I'd go to the bookstore and I would be able to find a dozen books, at least, that would keep me through another year of no books, except for what I could get from the library. But something happened, and I'm not exactly sure when it happened, but something changed about that. And like I said, I can't tell you when, but I'm pretty sure it happened just prior to Gamergate, a little bit prior to that, like maybe 2010-ish. Because around that time, I could still go to a bookstore. And in fact, every time we go to the city, so now I live in a small town, every time we go to the city, I would go to my favorite bookstore, which was a local, large, independent bookstore. And I knew that I could go in, I could browse, and I could find a book that I could take home and I could enjoy. And based on just the cover, the blurb, the summary, and you look at it and you're like, yeah, this is going to be fun. This is going to be an adventure. But then it's like something started to happen. And I think I know just when it started. Okay, it was this one book series that was about like a series of interdimensional Londons with, I don't know, different color codes or something. And the world building was interesting, a little bit shallow, but it was still fun. And the main story was not bad. But the main character was an unbearable Mary Sue. At least I think she was the main character. Otherwise, I don't know why she was in it at all. So it was sort of like the book series. The book it had a sour note to it, but it was readable. So that was okay. But then I realized, or no, I didn't even realize I didn't even realize it was happening till later. But what was happening is I would go into a bookstore and I would find a book that I thought was exciting or I thought would be fun to read, and I'd read it, and it would be like, it might have a good prologue, a good first chapter, maybe it had a good blurb or a good idea, but I would get into about, I don't know, like sometimes it's just the first chapter that went crap, but I get into 4 or 5 chapters in and it would just be like, what is this? This is awful. And it wasn't even the usual like middle build problems. It just, the quality just went to crap. And when I really started to notice this, I went into a bookstore and I got a fantasy book that featured Arabian world building. So, you know, all the mythology and all the stories of, you know, the Arab world. And that includes like all of them. That's not just Muslim. And I was really excited to read it because, you know, that region has a really fantastic storytelling tradition and great, like really great mythology. And the prologue was really good. So I was like, oh, I was really stoked. But the first chapter was unreadable. And it was unreadable because it was a first draft. Like, you know, when you read and you write and you work on that kind of thing, you know when something has been edited properly, has gone through that process, has been developed, and you know when something hasn't been, shall we say. So it's like, it's not even a mistake. It's like getting a burger, but your bun is a glob of dough, and the patty is like a splat of raw beef. You know, just it isn't finished. It's not cooking because it hasn't even been cooked. So this hasn't even been completed. And I'm like looking at this first chapter, and it had some really amateurish mistakes. And I don't want to say amateurish because I'm pretty sure that every writer, even the most seasoned, goes through that process where they do their first draft and they just put things in. It's just like you just put it in, you just slap in the stick it note because insert whatever here because you just want to get through it to start blocking out the structure of your story. So I'm not going to say it's amateurish, but it is like you instead of giving you the product, you're giving me part of what makes the product. So, you know, like 3D prints, you have that stuff that supports the undercuts, right? Yeah, that's not you don't give that to your reader. You give the polished product. But anyway, so I'm like, this isn't finished. Like they sent this out without it being properly edited. And it was really unfortunate because this guy could write. You could tell from the prologue. But I guess that's all they cared about was his name was Muslim. And they edited, I guess, the first 10 pages and then just sent it out. And I'm like, what? And at that point, I was starting to be like, something has gone wrong. And after that, and this is actually like I noticed it, but I didn't really think about it. But after that, I stopped going to bookstores, and I didn't even notice that I'd stopped going to bookstores. So when I talk about this book, it's in retrospect. Once one day I woke up, I'm like, I didn't even woke up. We were just going into a city, and we went past my favorite bookstore. And I'm like, you know, husband's like, do you want to stop? And I'm like, why? You know, I have no desire to go in anymore. And it was because I had experienced so many times I was burned going into a bookstore, finding something that looked good, and it wasn't a finished story. Like, I'm not kidding, guys. Like, I'm not saying that it was badly written. I'm saying it wasn't even written. Like, okay, and I just stopped going, and I hadn't even realized it until that moment when I was confronted with it, and I'm like, I don't really care. And it's unfortunate too, because it was one of the highlights of my life to go into bookstores and get books, and it's gone. And like I said, it took me a while to realize it had gone. So what the hell happened? Again, I had to figure it out from retrospect, but now I'm really curious. What happened? What happened to books?
Smart publishers know how to develop a mid-list, and so I think the real problem is most publishers have stopped trying to develop a mid-list because all they care to do is coast on hope and dreams of everything being a mega bestseller. This Big Five editor says what I have heard agents talking about and what I have seen myself. Meaning when I hear sales figures back about myself, about other people, and I ask my agent for context to contextualize, she tells me other authors tell me that 5-6 years ago, there used to be a lot more books that could sell 40,000 to 50,000 copies. Now more sell fewer than 10,000 copies. Top 100 best-selling adult titles increased 23% in 2018 compared to 2017. However, all other titles ranked below that top tier either fell or remained flat. Again, this feels very accurate. The big authors are getting bigger and everyone else is struggling, and we're all competing for attention and sales and a career.
Okay. So I want to talk about the mid-list for a bit here. For book publishers, a mid-list is all of the authors who are not bestsellers, yet are economically profitable. So they don't make huge hits. They aren't the Grissams, the Daniel Steeles, Kings, Sarah Masses, not like that. But they're perennial good sellers, and often they can sell over time as much as a bestseller, as long as they stay stocked. But there's a whole bunch of them, at least there were, and they're good books. They have maybe a bit more niche appeal, so they're often like science fiction and fantasy. But they're good and they're solid, and they maintain an audience and they grow an audience, and give them time, and they would be a best in terms of total volume sales. They could be considered bestseller if you took the total volume over like 10 years. So these are good books. You know, they're well crafted and they're solid and they're interesting. But the mid-list is sort of like, because they're slow growers, they're like a garden that you plant and cultivate in the hopes that one of the varieties, say a pumpkin, turns into a bumper crop. But even if they don't, they're good sellers. So they're going to make some profit. They may take more time to make that profit, but they are profitable. However, unlike the bestsellers, they do require cultivation. Bestsellers just getting struck by lightning. And often, I mean, we all know the Twilights, the 50 Shades of Grey. You know, often a bestseller doesn't have to really be that good. But in order to be part of the mid-list, it has to be fairly solid craft. Otherwise, people are not going to keep coming back. The particular types of people who like idea books or fantasy books, science fiction or fantasy books, or mysteries, they're not going to come back to these books if they're not well crafted. So the mid-list does have to be well crafted. You know, the bestseller can be like a hit of lightning, and they just hit a nerve and it goes boom. But a mid-list has to be like, you got to do good work, and it's got to be competent and solid. The mid-list, now looking back, is where I would go to find my favorite adventures. The mid-list and debut authors. After a while, I noticed that authors write like 3 or 4 books and then they seem to lose ideas. So I'd always go to new authors. I'd always be going to the bookstore to find new authors that might present something really interesting to read. So I was never the kind of reader who just stuck with one author. I was always on the lookout for new good, well-written fiction. And so you have your garden in the mid-list. You're hoping that one might end up sprouting, being huge, but then most of them are just reliable producers that bring in an income stream, but aren't like crazy. So to conclude, or to not to conclude, I'm going to cut that out. I probably won't cut that out, but I would cut that out if I was actually showing this on the channel, because I don't want to use the word conclude. Everybody's walked out at that point. The mid-list caters to readers who enjoy a buffet of good fiction rather than eating the same fast food bestseller day after day. So basically readers like me. And debut authors are probably going to be looking to appeal to readers like me. And because of that, I was probably one of those readers that regularly drove mid-list books, like the sales of mid-list books, from being very minimal to being economically profitable. So in current era, the mid-list usually is lucky if they break 10,000. But when I was still reading and going to bookstores, mid-list authors were usually making like $40,000 to $50,000 or thousands of sales a year, not dollars, but sales. Now they're more likely to make 10. And I'm pretty sure that the reason why the mid-list is dying is because of the choices of readers like me. We happen to the mid-list, or rather, the latest offerings in the mid-list happen to us. Like I no longer feel I can go into a bookstore and find something worth reading. I've been burned too many times by clever concepts and blurbs and nice covers and excellent prologues or first chapters, which hide an dense amount of poorly edited amateurish bilge once you get through the prologue or the first chapter, or poorly edited, even worse, poorly edited amateurish sermons, which, you can believe it, is even, I don't want to open a book to find a chick track in text form. So now I rarely buy new books. I'll buy older books that people recommend to me, but I don't take a chance on a debut author anymore. What's the point? Because I've gone to the buffet and I've bitten into an omelet and found it's filled with a cow turd too many times. It's like I can't even eat eggs. That's not a really good analogy for me because I'm allergic to eggs. But like you get like a pastry filled with something, and you bite into it, nice flaky pastry. Yeah, you bite into a cow turd. It's like, no, I don't want to. I don't want your buffet. I don't want to even go to your buffet anymore. Like, I'm done. And I think there's a lot of people like me, and that's why the mid-list is shrinking. But the real question is, why has everything gotten so bad? I mean, the mid-list is shrinking because people like me are no longer buying it, obviously. Otherwise, we'd be making the 40, 50,000 sales, not the up to 10,000 sales. Like 10 is a big number now. Okay, well, let's do a thought experiment. Okay, let's say you only care about money. You can easily market an author based on the author being the first X and Y who's Z. In other words, just slap a minority label and there will be a market for people who want to catch every minority mon. But then it's not about the writing, it's about the author. In fact, it's not even about the author, it's about the boxes the author checks. So why bother editing the writing? And if anyone complains, they're of course an XYist who doesn't want XYs taking over their hobby, creating a nice creamy head of controversy that will drive even more sales. Win, win, win. Sort of. The strategy isn't creating a healthy mid-list of entertaining niche fiction, thus the many, many, many buffet readers who've walked away. and thus the decline in sales from 40K to 10K. The sad puppies, if you remember them, they were the ones who were calling out the Hugos for becoming sort of elitist and diversity focused instead of on merit. They wanted to bring merit back. The sad puppies wanted to bring merit and entertainment to the Hugos, back to the Hugos, so which are the People's Choice Awards in science fiction and fantasy. So it was supposed to be about the stuff that people find entertaining, the adventures, and not the literary elitism or the diversity. It's supposed to be about entertainment merit. But unfortunately, the Hugos have become about diversity to the exclusion of merit. And it's not hard to infer from that this is a symptom of a larger problem in the industry. I mean, if you have an award that's awarding diversity rather than merit for the industry, it sort of reflects what the industry is really prioritizing. So now the mid-list is full of low-effort, poorly edited books that check boxes. Mid-list authors are selling less and less. And what's appalling, what actually really sort of gets my goat, is the author of that Arabian Nights-styled fantasy world could write. He wrote a fantastic prologue. He just needed a publishing house that cared about his work enough to strengthen his weaknesses so that they didn't tear down his strengths. In other words, he needed a publishing house that cared to edit him. And that's the real jip, isn't it? That's the real sticking point. These houses create lukewarm puke while exploiting minority authors to deflect criticism of their cynical money grab. They don't want to spend the money on the editing, on proper editing. Okay? And when we complain, we're the bigots. Okay, look at what this author tuber has to say about the recent strike in Harper. Look at what this author tuber has to say about the recent... Why am I saying HarperCollins? HarperCollins. I need to have a long talk with the speech centers of my brain, constantly screwing me up. Okay, HarperCollins was dealing with a strike last year.
HarperCollins is another one of the big five publishing houses, and they are unique in that some of their employees are unionized, which is not common across the publishing industry. So they went on strike at the tail end of last year for 3 whole months. The ratification of the new contract was an incredible accomplishment because this new contract includes raises to the base salaries across HarperCollins. It gives union workers overtime protections and 2 additional holidays and a volunteer day, as well as guarantees that they will be compensated for diversity and inclusion work, which is so critical in the publishing industry, which is notoriously terrible with diversity.
Coincidentally, once they started to say, okay, yeah, we'll come to the table with your demands, they also announced that they are laying off 5% of their editorial and staff, so workplace. So at the same time as they said, okay, we'll come to the negotiating tables with your demands, they lay off 5%. They announced that they're going to lay off 5%. So unless it's just a massive coincidence, it sort of looks like HarperCollins laid off 5% of their workplace in order to free up the funds to give the strikers into the strikers' demands. All right. And one of those demands was to be paid for diversity work. So apparently you're not just paid for, it's not enough to be paid for your wage, which you're doing work, but if you're also doing diversity work, you get more pay for that, I guess. I mean, I thought you'd just have a salary and then you'd work a certain amount of hours, but apparently diversity work is like a form of overtime. So they laid off 5% of their staff in order to be able to fund diversity work. Okay, so this is going to get worse. Of course, this particular author tuber thinks this is going to make things better for readers and writers. I don't see how removing staff and freeing up funds to focus more on diversity is going to make the problem of poorly edited fiction better. Okay? I don't see it. Boy, that was an expensive get. But anyway. In my opinion, stuff like this indicates what's left of the mid-list is probably doomed. And this is where it gets darker. Remember how I said that the publishing industry is more censorious than an authoritarian theocratic regime? Oh boy. The same mean girls that got my comic booted from a convention and lied about it in the media are the same mean girls that gatekeep all of publishing. The things that authors, published authors, are being canceled over now are ridiculous. This is from a Guardian article titled, "If Publishers Become Afraid, We're in Trouble. Publishing's cancel culture debate boils over." But quoting, "But people," this is quoting a young member of a publishing, like a young staff member in a publishing house. "But people aren't having these kinds of conflicts over simple differences of political opinion, as you might assume from listening to the debate on it." She says, this Refusenik says, "Nobody's refusing to work on a book because it doesn't fit with their party affiliation. What's been at stake has virtually always been a question of whether the book or author is responsible for inciting prejudice against already marginalized and oppressed minorities. That's an absolutely valid area for debate. It's also not always clear-cut. Some people will be deafened by a dog whistle that others can't hear." That last sentence is terrifying. She's essentially saying that she can detect things in the text, and the author says, "Well, I didn't intend that. It doesn't matter. She's detected it." Like a bomb-sniffing dog. She has the powers of detecting these dog whistles that no one else can hear, suspiciously. And it's like, okay, so absolutely no oversight, and she's put herself in a position of a censor with no need to answer to anyone, because, only she can hear the deafening dog whistle. Anyway, so this is like, she's essentially saying, so only she can discern the subtle signals of witchcraft. Therefore, she should be the one that determines what has a right to be published. And incidentally, when she says it doesn't fit with her party affiliation, I'm pretty sure that she's the type of person that thinks that everybody who doesn't agree with her is a Nazi, especially when you're talking about dog whistles that no one else can hear. What if she disagrees with another witchfinder general about what is a dog whistle? Is any disagreement with her itself a dog whistle? No one else can hear? Like if you refuse, if she's like, "Yeah, go get me a latte," and you're like, "No, I'm not. Are you dog whistling supremacy because you disagreed with her?" I would guess yes. I mean, my scenario is a little bit absurd, but I see the hoof prints of this particular type of animal many times. There's an author out there who has been ritually excised from the industry, just bombed to her constituent atoms for using the phrase "a chocolate skin," even after employing the services of a sensitivity reader, and despite that phrase being a quote from a minority child describing themselves, and despite that phrase being used multiple times in currently published works. I guess it was just her. She was the one. She just got tagged. She drew the short end of the straw. She was the one that was going to get slammed for that. Because you're not supposed to write anything that offends anyone. Even if nobody else understands what they're offended about, because only they can hear the dog whistle. You can't do that, not even accidentally, not even mildly. Even if you have to squint and stand on your head to see the offense. And this is leading to identifying things that might be at worst a silly gaffe, at worst as a secret dog whistle, and liquefying the offenders. Just think about that for a second. This is what the publishing industry is now. It's a bunch of people listening for dog whistles only they can hear. Okay. And And yeah, if they're going to do that to to an author who did something as well, I don't know if it's innocuous, but it's like I've seen that phrase plenty of times. And if she was quoting a minority student using it on herself, I don't see the problem, but whatever. If they're going to do that to an author for an infraction that mild, what are they going to do to literal fascists like me who advocate for freedom of speech and creators' rights? No more pushing the boundaries of human expression, I guess. So let's sum up. Emerging authors who want to go the traditional route first have to run a gauntlet of biased agents who prioritize diversity over merit. Oh, I didn't show you that. There was a panel of agents who explained all of the vague and contradictory things that they wanted in a manuscript, but they all pretty much agreed that diversity is important and don't have any dog whistles. You know, you can't know what those might be, but they'll know. So you have those agents who are gatekeeping, and if you actually get through that gauntlet, each book gets less actual editing. So the weaknesses of the work is on full display. So they're not actually creating a mid-list, because if you want to create a mid-list, you have to go and strengthen the writing. You've got to make the craft competent, but they're not wasting their money on that, because it's all about, you got to catch them all, right? It's all about superficial framing and packaging, which includes whatever minority checkbox the author checks. So, but unfortunately, there's only so many people who are going to buy a book because, oh, I don't have a Black lesbian paraplegic. I need to catch that for my collection. You know, there's only so many people with that mentality. So the mid-list is disappearing because nobody's interested in it anymore. Nobody's interested in buying it. That's literally, if your sales are going from 50,000 to 10, it's because your audience is disappearing. They don't want to buy it. So you have to run this gauntlet of agents. You don't get any editing. You might as well just be like, yeah, these are the boxes I check, because they're going to only do the most superficial packaging of your book. And if you accidentally set off a dog whistle, like if you just somehow say something that one of these witchfinder generals thinks is a dog whistle that only they can hear, your publishing, your career as an author will be cleansed with fire. Boy, it really is, as I predicted, a smoking wasteland that will eventually be reduced down. Well, I never predicted this about the publishing field. I just predicted it about everything, that everything is going to become a smoking wasteland that will eventually be reduced down to two people, both of whom are trying to throw the other out because they're each convinced that the other's mere existence is a dog whistle. Like, the more you give into that paranoid mentality, the more dog whistles they are. And not to mention that traditional publishing shows signs of having pivoted to something vastly different. A slush fund for politicians to get around caps on campaign donations. If you can't get a huge campaign donation, why not a $200 million book advance? That's been happening. Maybe 200 million might be an exaggeration. A platform for sensationalist celebrity exposés. Yet another hit on the frickin' monarchy. Lifeless garbage churned out by activist writers who spurn craft for virtue signaling. And of course, keeping all of this afloat, the perennial, like the every year, and also very aging bestsellers, King, Steele, Grisham. At this point, if about a dozen authors die, the traditional publishing industry will die with them, because there's no one coming up through the mid-list to replace them. The mid-list is about cultivation, development, building skills, improving craft. So you really have to understand the fundamentals of cooking to create a buffet of good food, rather than just one mediocre dish with mass appeal. I mean, you just can't create a bestseller. It's just an accident. But you can create a mid-list of good, strong fiction that provides an income stream over time. When you abandon merit, you abandon everything that allows authors to develop through effort rather than simply being hit by lightning. That's what the midlist represents. It represents excellence in authorial craft and editorial craft coming together to produce a good product that sells. Doesn't sell a lot like a bestseller, but it sells well enough to justify itself and well enough to bring an income stream into the publisher. But of course, that requires a focus on merit. Okay, it requires a willingness to invest in your authors. So without meritocracy, there is no midlist. Now, I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction. This is what happens when you say the future is female and you actively discriminate against men. You lose the virtues that men bring to the table, like meritocracy. Men have a higher threshold for fear and offense. They focus on what people have earned rather than what people are owed. Think about that. What you've earned rather than what you're owed or can pretend that you're owed. And that's a very different attitude. And what's really obnoxious about this, okay? What's obnoxious about pointing this out is that people are okay with recognizing all of these things that men do when it's framed as bad. Okay? When you point out that men's lack of fear leads them to Darwin themselves more often, or their indifference to offense leads them to enjoy offensive jokes, or their focus on earning merit leads them to be callous towards those in need, you can say that. You can say all of that. You can recognize all of these traits that men have as long as you frame them as negative. But when you point out that these traits have an important positive side, and suddenly you're a misogynist who hates women. But they do. Men prioritize freedom over safety and meritocracy over virtue signaling. No one creates a strike of lightning from the blue. No one creates bestsellers. They can only plant a lot of trees and tend to them well and hope. Meritocracy creates midlists, and men create meritocracies. If you can't handle me saying this because men are tough, thick-skinned, and courageous, then men make meritocracies because they're callous, indifferent, and foolhardy. But they still make them. They still, and it's not to say that women can't. But unless they embrace an aspect of their own masculinity as a woman, they probably won't. Because they'll be looking at the world in terms of who is owed and what they're owed, rather than what people earn. And you can see this. You say, oh, men are callous. Oh, that's okay to say. Well, men demand people earn, which means men create meritocracies. You can't say that. So what we're seeing in the publishing industry is we're seeing the receding of men and that masculine virtue, meritocracy. And what we're seeing now is a focus on who is owed. Okay, who is owed? Which are the categories of people who are owed? Not what we can build, not what we can earn, but what we're owed. Very different attitude. So, and the other thing we're seeing is that when you add this idea of who's owed what, you invite this kind of purity signaling. I'm owed, or this group that I advocate is owed. And that's the stink of the misery machine, which is what I talked about earlier. A censorious pall dominated by whomever can claim the most defense. And in the name of the safety, the misery machine turns an industry into an ideological slaughterhouse where nobody feels safe, ironically. And now the mainstay audience for fiction, even women, are now starting to turn away from reading because the product is so bad. Whew. The day the mean girls came for me, I realized I had a choice. I could choose to pursue success in a system that does not recognize freedom, creative freedom, or merit, or I could walk away and forge my own path. Ultimately, the future isn't female. The future is what we build together. And men have their own virtues. They have their own focuses, and those focuses lead them to build different things than women. They build meritocracies. They build mid-lists. And without mid-lists, publishing is going to die as soon as they lose their big bestsellers. And when you silence your creators through this purity spiraling and, oh, is that a dog whistle? And flee from merit, you've turned away from the future. So it's not the future isn't female. It's like we've decided we don't have a future. All right, so I'm going to give you an update on where I'm at with my story at the end of this very, very long, I guess it's sort of a stream. I have just finished the 4th round of beta reading on my book, The Captive Eye. And I believe that at this point it needs to go to editing, which, because it's really unlikely I'm going to get a fair shake in the publishing industry. I mean, maybe they won't have a clue who I am until they Google my name and see all the stuff published about me in the media. You know, honestly, I'd rather go the independent route because I'm getting less and less of a sense that even if I were the kind of person who could succeed in the publishing industry, even if I was that kind of person, publishers aren't investing any kind of effort in mentoring. You know, that kind of mentoring where you take somebody who has flaws and weaknesses and you work with them on it, you recognize them and you work with them on it. You have to recognize those flaws and weaknesses in order to work with them. But that's a masculine way of mentoring. And I'm not saying women can't do it, but they really have to recognize that those masculine behaviors are important to emulate and to keep. Okay, so yeah, women can do it, but certainly not women who they say things like the future is female. So regardless, I don't think I really fit with the publishing industry, but even if I did, probably not going to be mentored. They don't mentor their mid-list anymore. They don't take the effort to help authors through their weaknesses. And I have a really fatal one as an author. It took me a really long time to really pinpoint through the beta readings, the rounds of beta readings, and also going out and a bunch of people helped me by supporting me getting other types of editing, basically getting my first chapters looked at. I'm not good at beginnings. Like, I'm pretty okay with the middle build. Apparently I'm good with the climax, and there's some good stuff in between. But my beginnings suck. And that is something that even if I was, like I said, even if the publishing industry would overlook who I am and what I've done, it's unlikely that they would work with me on that problem, because this is the problem that I see. This is the one thing that they still seem to want to keep in terms of merit, which is they want authors who begin things well. You know, if it falls off a cliff at the 4th or 5th chapter, they don't seem to care as much, but they want the beginning at least to be decent. And it's obvious why, because the beginning drives sales. People make their decision after the first 5 pages, right? After that, you know, it can all go to crap, but the sale is already made, right? And it's unlikely that people are going to refund. So there's like this focus on that one aspect of merit now, and I don't have it. I mean, I think I can have it, and I've really, really worked hard on trying to develop that weakness. But I'm at the point where I need to work with an actual editor, and that is not cheap. And I just want, so I'm telling you guys this, and if you're interested in helping me bring this project to where it could be, and to really work on bringing some kind of meritocracy into the world of fiction. Like I'm not just putting this out there and like putting it out there and saying, oh, this is my book, buy it. I want to put something out there that is something that I can be proud of, something you guys can be proud of supporting, and something that can reflect a real dedication to craft rather than just egotism or virtue signaling. Or just making a quick buck because I have however many subscribers and many of you will go and buy it because I told you. So I want to make this the best that I can. And like I said, I've done the rounds of baiting, which, oh my God, that wasn't as bad as the lawsuit. But I will say, going through the process of being beta read, like not edited, but having beta readers, yeah, that's its own kind of misery. But I want to do this because I want to get better. Simple as that. I will endure whatever hardship needs to be endured. I will swallow my pride. I will beat back my ego if I can get my craft up to a standard that is worthy of being read, is worthy of an audience. And so I'm appealing to you as well to help me get the funds together to get this properly edited. You can do so at feedthebadger.com/I or feedthebadger.com/support. And it would really be great. And I know it's been a while since we've had sort of an adventure together. Like the last one was getting Brian out of Chicago, which thank you for that. And then the one before that was the convention, which I know you guys really enjoyed. Those of you who went enjoyed it quite a bit. So this is a new adventure. It's been 3 years, but I think that this is important. The kind of work that I'm doing with this story is just a really quick summation. I can tell people about men's issues and about the need to care about men, but I can't inspire people to want to care. That requires a story, and that's the story that I've written. So this is once again my attempt, and we've always talked about this on Honey Badger Radio, to try to bring more interest and more attention to caring about men, to realizing we need to care about men. And if we don't have a future, okay? I'm not saying that maybe the future is female. The future is women caring about men. How's that? All right, so if you would like to help me out with that, once again, it's feedthebadger.com/support. I'm going to put it under the support one. So feedthebadger.com/support. That'll switch over to the usual monthly fundraiser when it's time, because, we always have our monthly expenses. That doesn't change. So anyway, I really wanted to take this adventure with you, and I absolutely want to try to make this the best that I can, the best that it can be. And I believe that we need to bring meritocracy back to creativity, meritocracy back to books. Sorry guys, I screwed up the ending a bit. Anyway, let's bring back the mid-list together. And please go to feedthebadger.com/support to help me out and help me do that. I didn't screw up quite as bad as forgetting the link to the fundraiser and an email for the fundraiser, but it was a little bit screwed up, so I had to do an update from a different location. Hopefully this isn't too jarring. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of autistic messages in the comments. What happened? Well, a wizard did it. So this is the very first attempt at the hurdle.
Okay. Jump. Jump.